Happy Tip Tuesday, golfers. Today we're in our Gears 3D motion capture studio. I'm in the avatar suit with all the markers. Jake's behind the podium there. Jake, I want to teach people a thing or two today about spine tilt, but we want to dispel a myth as well. So can you bring up the PGA Tour average avatar and just show them standing over an iron and then a driver, and maybe explain, you know, spine tilt a little bit, how the upper body tilts back a little bit when you play golf?
Yeah, so basically everybody's spine tilt is a line through the spine vertically, so we get an idea of how straight up and down you're standing.
Yeah, 90 degrees would be straight up and down, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what we notice here is that the average tour pro has a 91.08 degree spine tilt, which means they are tilt away from the target about a degree.
And that naturally happens because the backhand, the lower hand on the club, obviously tilts me a little bit to keep my forearms nice and square. So there's a natural tilt, but it's only 1.5 degrees on average with a tour pro.
Yeah, exactly right. Your trail shoulder is lower because your trail hand is lower, so you're tilted slightly away from the golf ball. That allows us to get...
I noticed, Jake, the shoulders are about 6.5 or 7.5 degrees there, right?
Yeah, on average. 7.5 is what we see with most tour players. You know, you will see some pros at the 5 to 10 range, obviously. That's how averages work. But 7.5 is what we see most of the time.
Let's look at that driver now, because I think the myth we're trying to dispel is people really want to get way behind that driver to swing up on it.
Agreed.
And they get themselves in pretty bad positions. I'm going to show people in a second, but let's look at that tour pro. So what's his spine tilt with a driver now?
Yeah, so the average is 92.65. So we're about 1.5 degrees more spine tilt with a driver than an iron.
Not very much.
Not very much at all. Now, the reason that happens is because when you put the ball more forward in your stance and then you widen out your stance, there is a natural exaggeration of the shoulder tilt. So we go from about 7.5 degrees of tilt on average to about 10.5 degrees of tilt on average. And that is what creates the slightly increased spine angle. The reason that's so important is because when you do this properly, we still have a nice neutral and straight spine that we can rotate around properly.
All right, let's come to me now, Jake, and I'm going to show people and dispel that myth a little bit with our live avatar.
Great, let's do it.
Okay, Jake, so it's time to capture me. Let's have a look here and see what we see with spine tilt and explain this to golfers.
Yeah, let's do it.
So there I am, I'm captured. It's kind of cool to be in the suit. You can see, gets all my lines. If I get into a proper position here, so there's 92 or so, or, you know, you can see everything's moving in real time, but there's a little bit of tilt as this backhand is down. Everybody see that? And then with a driver with a wider stance, there's just a little bit more. Does that make sense, Jake?
Yeah, it's worth noting, everybody. Obviously, Kevin, who's a little more of a drawer, tilts behind the golf ball a small amount more, but it's still a nice neutral balance.
What's that number, Jake? That feels about right with a driver. I've got a wider stance here.
Well, now you're at about 93.
Yeah. So here's the myth we want to dispel is a lot of people are taught that if you slide this backhand all the way down to your knee to really get behind it. What's the number now, Jake?
104.
Which is just crazy. I feel out of balance, but also when I rotate, look how my lead shoulder, my front shoulder is higher than my back shoulder. I mean, it really puts me in a position that I can barely swing properly.
And I think that's really important to point out. We mentioned before how a slight tilt puts you behind the golf ball, but allows you to rotate properly around your spine. When you create these artificial angles, it compromises that ability. So obviously, you're not going to turn like you just showed us. That feels ridiculous in action. So you're going to have to compensate in some way, and that's where a lot of people get tripped up with their driver swing.
Yeah, I really like that, Jake. So everything's natural in golf. Golfers, you have the backhands a little lower to produce a couple of degrees of tilt with a driver, and the wider stance the ball forward. It's a couple more degrees maybe, but keep everything simple and natural, and you'll play your best golf. Thanks for watching, golfers. Like this tip, subscribe, and check out all of our other tips.